you can analyse it depending on whether you think it's at a corporate level, which is about the direction of the organisation. So that's very much, it's going to be a massive change. That will be something that almost shapes the whole culture and the way that everything's done. So is it going to be that high up in terms of changing the direction of where they're going, or is it more about tweaking the way that they compete? Is it about creating something that we think is a competitive advantage, bringing in an innovation in terms of the way the service is delivered, the different infrastructure we've got, potentially even changing our customer base. So that will help us differentiate whether it's at a corporate level or whether it's at a business level. Is it changing the way that we add value? So potentially just have a think about the change that you're identifying and sort of try and categorize it to some extent. But also what might be really helpful when you're starting off your assignment is to have a feel, to try and do some research on how the organisation describes its purpose. Where do you think you'd find that if we were trying to look that up for an airline?
Probably their mission statement on their website, maybe, or something.
Yeah.
Their actual report.
Yes. So these are the places that I was thinking as well. So if it's an airline, we'll probably have a corporate section to their website or a corporate site, which I think is probably where we're more likely to find it. Or it might even be if they're on their sort of recruitment bit, if they're ever trying to recruit anyone. But yeah, the mission statement, if you could find it, would be there. It would tend to be, alternatively, would be in their annual reports or their shareholder reports if they've got those. But that will give us a really good feel as to what the organisation's about. And I think a starting and an end point for the assignment might be actually, is the purpose aligned with the change that they're suggesting? You know, is that purpose still relevant in the environment we're in at the moment? So yeah, so I think that would be some good groundwork to have a look at the purpose and for both assignments too. So we've got two contrasting approaches to how we come up with a strategy. The prescriptive one is one where we're looking outside the organisation in the environment. We're looking at what we've got internally in terms of our resources. They will help shape whatever we consider as the purpose of the organisation will be. And from that, we'll then look at what options we've got to deliver on that. We'll make a choice. So it could be with a big infrastructure in terms of, so what Ryanair's got. We've got an environment that's increasingly cost conscious, that wants to travel and explore. So actually our purpose is about creating a value proposition that's going to be mass market, that's going to be low frills, high sort of add-ons, if you like, and that's the option that we go for. So that's the choice we make, and then we implement it through the branding that we've got, through the service that we design. So that one, we're almost looking at the external environment, and then that shapes the way that we're going to deliver on it. Now, in contrast, so the ways that we can do that, there's a couple of different other sort of theories that feed into this. So I class that as a push approach, because we've got a desire, we've got an idea, we know where we want to be in terms of our strategy. So as I say, in Ryanair, it's this sort of low cost, mass market, really market leaders actually in terms of the short haul airline. The theories that can describe this are, one is competition. So we're looking at what the competition do and we're deciding where we want to be pitched in there. So if we're looking at Ryanair's competition, who would they be?
EasyJet.
Yep, all said in unison.
I would say it used to be Flybe, but they've gone, haven't they now?
I'm not in touch with those still up there. Any others?
Jet2 is a little bit better, but yeah, still a budget airline, isn't it?
So do Jet2, do they just do airlines, or do they do the added value with holidays as well?
Yeah, they
do holidays, car rental, they add everything on.
Do they? And do they lead on, do they sell just the flights as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
You get flights and hotel as a package, or you can even hire cars through them as well.
Okay. So. And how are Ryanair different to those?
I think Jet2 have got a better that they've got a better reputation.
Better customer service.
From a customer point of view. I think they've got a lot more resources than Ryanair, because I think when it comes to their holidays, they own some of their hotels.
Okay.
I think they do. I know Thomas Cook used to, compared to Ryanair, which I think they just team up with like, is it like booking.com or something like that? I think if you click on it, it goes through to like an affiliated company.
Right. Okay. So they've got quite different. They've deliberately probably. I think Ryanair, by the sounds of it, are quite stripped back in terms of their approach and wanting to be as low cost as possible, aren't they? And that's how they want to position themselves. I also think they potentially come across as less family friendly than say Jet2's advertising is more. I don't think Ryanair sort of appeal to a sort of low stress experience, do they really? Whereas Jet2 tries to be a bit more put your mind at ease. So they've got different perceptions anyway.
I think Jet2 don't lead with their pricing.
Yeah, and Ryanair absolutely do, don't they?
Yeah, like with Ryanair, it's run to the plane so you can sit together kind of feeling, whereas with Jet2, it's a bit more about everything's included. You know what you're paying for.
Yeah, and it happens to be good value as well.
Yeah.
So our competition based is looking at what we've already got, deciding where we're going to sit, and then rolling it out. Our resource based is looking more at what we've got internally. So I think with the Ryanair, they will buy not potentially new like they'll sort of recondition airlines at a certain aircraft of a certain age. They'll look at, bring what they're going to bring to the party to create an offering around. So it's based on what they've got. Game-based theory. Now, this is where we're sort of trying to work out if we do something, what's the competitor going to do in response? So if Ryanair do one promotion, what will EasyJet do? So it's sort of almost trying to calculate different moves based on what your position's going to be. And then cooperation and network theories, that's where we're extending what we can offer based on how we can align with different brands. So you mentioned about booking.com might be an extension. So they will stick to their core, which is about the airlines and about a low cost carrier and a low cost experience. But then to add the extra bits on, they'll work with other organisations that sort of share the low cost values, but maybe are quite different in terms of their brand.
So would that be with like Jet2 that they provide a transfer, and they obviously employ or they hire a local company to take you from the airport to resort?
Yeah, and so absolutely. So they're building. Well, they're really working on the value added, aren't they? So what was sort of trying to get at was that with Jet2, I just get the impression that everything's sort of sorted, so you just don't have that horrible sort of I've got to do this when I get there, I've got to do so but the cooperation and network would be where they potentially don't necessarily do it themselves, they build alliances to do that. Whereas I think from what you've said, Jet2 might actually have more control over that extra bit that they offer rather than through alliances.
I think a big thing with Ryanair, I mean, they try and lead with their prices to advertise, to get pull customers in. But then when customers actually go to, book a flight or whatever, by the time you end up kind of adding all the extras like your luggage, etc., it's not much cheaper than Jet2.
So that's an ethical issue there, isn't it? Because it's not necessarily a transparency.
No. But I suppose it's sort of strategy, isn't it, to kind of get people
headline on price. Yeah, absolutely. And you might not have been thinking of going away, but then you see, wherever that it's only going to be $9.99, and might as well. So they're sort of by that stage you're so far down booking it, you're like, I might as well just carry on if it's only X amount extra.
Committed now, yeah.
I suppose it's them working with the airport, to be honest, and the ground team, because I think a lot of like the ground team, like the people that sort of move the planes around and things like that, they all work for a different company, don't they? I think, I can't remember what they're called at the airport.
Yeah.
Like you got Swiss Sports, one, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and that would be their sort of corporation and what they're building in. But again, I bet they hammer them on price because they're trying to get the best deal that they can, because everything is based on this low cost position. And we will talk about that because that's one of Porter's generic strategies, when you've got options for where you're going to be positioned in the market and how you're going to differentiate yourself. So that's our sort of push. We're looking at what we've got, we're looking at what else is going on, but we are like, we've got an idea and we're going to roll it out. Now, the sort of other extreme, if you like, is this sort of evolving business model where we have got our resources and environment and we're constantly looking at what we've got. They do inform our purpose and us, but our strategy and development and implementation, it goes back, it's sort of, we evolve, but then we're looking at what's going on and we just almost move with the changes that the market's got. So can you think of anything that they do in the airline that would be sort of evolving with the way that, you know, we're behaving differently?
I think one of them would be when there was trouble in a country that meant that people then didn't want a holiday there. So one example would be Tunisia. There was a lot of people going to Tunisia on holiday, and then they had the terrorism attack there. I suppose they would have had to set a strategy as to what they were going to offer the customers. Were they going to make them go because they booked it? Were they going to happily change them? Were they going to give them particular choices, I suppose, of where they could change to go to? Whether they could have a refund, whether they could have holiday vouchers. I suppose it would depend on what they wanted to offer on those flights to come back.
Yeah, so some of it will be, yeah, as you say, like that's in response to a very direct situation, and then some of it might be more general in terms of what changes. So British Airways, on their short haul flights, they I think they did always used to offer sort of food and drink, but they partnered up with M&S Food to start offering, so you could buy their food on your short haul flights. And I think part of that would have been because that's what people were used to on short haul flights. They didn't mind buying their own food, you know, they were almost expecting it. So whereas BA were giving it away for free, they didn't need to anymore. So they sort of saw the way the market was shifting, got the right partnership in place, the one that also had a key British brand, if you like, and British brand values, and then aligned with them to change their strategy, which would have cut their costs actually as well and would have generated more income for them. So that's sort of an evolving. So with this, it's less of a sort of, this is the way we're going to do it at any cost. It's more of a like, actually, this is what people are used to now, so let's go with it, or this is something that's happened and let's see how we respond to it. So the idea with these is that emergent comes from survival based. So this could be the example of how we're going to deal with a disaster in a particular country and maintain our reputation. Some of it can be because we don't know what's going to happen, so we actually have to change our strategy because we're not sure. So I'm sure in terms of like the insurances that the airlines have to take, that they'll be looking at what they have to do now to make sure if people can't fly again for a period, so they're trying to minimise the financial risk to them. Some of it will be based on what people they can get hold of in terms of who works and what skill sets they've got. Does that then give them an advantage for changing the direction they've got? Some of it will be based on the technology and things that they learn, like lessons learning potentially from internally, but it could even be from other organisations. But we've just got all these different factors which feed into this sort of constant evolution of the way the business is going and sort of responsiveness. I think the big challenge we've got with airlines, or the big challenge they've got, is very, very high fixed costs due to having the airplanes, having them stored somewhere, all those sort of things just mean it's really difficult when they can't be, when they're not flying at the same levels, even if they're not paying the human resource costs of paying people to work on those flights. The infrastructure to run an airline is just so steep that actually then when it grinds to a halt, it's going to be very difficult for them to just sort of to accept that loss unless they've got the money in their reserves. So I think it'd be interesting what you can find out when you're doing your research, but I think it is a very, very difficult time for them. So the idea is neither of those approaches in their purest form are going to be real. Instead, we're going to have something between the two. So we have to have some idea of a direction that we're going in, especially with such a high fixed cost industry, because we're going to have a vision for what that's going to look like in the future. Otherwise, we can't instill that in our team or through our values. So we've got these sort of intentions, but then we've got these emergent responses as well, which make the most of everything that's going on externally, but also what we've got internally. Can you sort of see how that works in practice? Can you see how it works maybe where you're working, that combination of the two?
Yeah.
So it sort of makes, how on earth would you find out? So if we're back to the question about the airlines, because I want this to be as relevant as it can be to your assignments, how are you going to find out their strategy?
I was going to ask this actually, because like JLR, for example, got loads of initiatives going on at the moment, a lot of reforms and different initiatives to save money, and I'm talking like millions. But you wouldn't find that, like you probably wouldn't be able to see that.
Well,
like we've got plenty of access to that material because it's all on our
yeah.
like internal systems and stuff. But how would someone else see it? I don't know.
I think that's back to the, you know, where I think it was Anna mentioned about potentially looking at their reports, their annual reports. In their annual reports, forget the numbers, the bit at the beginning, the executive summary, it should give something on the future direction of the business. And for the report that you're writing, especially like 1,000 words, 10 minutes, it's not masses, is it? You've just got to have an idea as to where they see the future.
There's a website called Craft, and they basically say what companies have been doing, and I used it for the assignment last time in Facebook. But basically it breaks everything down. So it'll tell you how much they make and what they make in what areas. So like majority of Facebook make their money on sort of advertising, not the actual social media part, but it'll tell you what they've done in the past, but also it might give you a bit more of an insight of what they might implement going forward. So it's quite a good website to have a look at.
So how do you spell? Is that like...
so it's, can you still hear me if I go on to a different page? Can you still hear me now?
Yep.
So it's craft.co. I've got it as, I think it should say .com potentially. And copy the link to the Facebook bit that I've got. Pop it on the messages.
Okay, thank you.
Looks a bit odd because I think it should have a .com, not a .co, but it does come up. So what does it tell you? It tells you their overview, where they're located, the key people within their company, their competitors. It talks about their revenue and their financial metrics. It tells you all their recent news that's going on. Tells you about all like sort of the CEO, the directors, where they run from, how many offices they've got. What does it tell you? It breaks all the revenue and everything down, so where they make money. So it might be that you can see that they've lost on where they hire, how much money they've lost over so many years. It might just be able to give you a bit more information.
Okay, thank you.
And it tells you where they're placed in the market compared to other social media companies, so it probably will do it for airlines, I would have thought.
That'd be really helpful. One thing that might be worth you doing before you go too much into detail on once you've chosen your organisations is think of, so you need to have something where we can find something on what their change is. I know that, but then you also maybe come up with a couple of different ones and then just find out how much you can find on them. Because if there's ones that are have got more in their annual reports than others, they might be easier to use. So some of this has got to be about how easily you can access the information. Because you can't make too many assumptions about this. A lot of it has got to be based on what they're really doing. So maybe that's part of your sort of rationale for deciding, is just what access to what information you can get.
Can you cite that directly from that company's website, for example, if that's where you've found that information? Or
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So on that website, I've just quickly checked. There's British Airways, there's Etihad, there's KLM, there's EasyJet, there's Ryanair. So I presume whatever you pick should be some information.
I was just looking at British Airways actually, and it looks like there's some good stuff on there. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I was looking at that as well. Quite a lot on there, to be fair, isn't there?
Yeah, I just stumbled across it when I did my
Yeah.
last assignment, and I just thought it's got quite a lot of good information on there.
And also, do you remember, so when Tom talked to us about there's something called LibGuides, libguides.coventry.ac.uk, and that has business management leadership, and on there they've got databases, and one of those that looks really good is called, is it Euromonitor? You mentioned that before, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's where you find it.
Yeah, Passport Euromonitor, and it's yeah, all the market research.
There is a particular way when you log in, it'll ask you to register, but you don't register. You click the back button, and then it'll log you in as a uni person. I'll have a look, and if anybody wants information on it, then
I'll do the same actually.
Because I know that Alfred actually did a video, and it's on my Moodle. I don't know whether I might be able to download it, and
share it.
When we get Owler up, we might be able to just put it on there.
Yeah. That sounds good. I'll add some information, send it to everyone as well. Yeah, that sounds really good, because I think a key to this is just getting the right quality information, isn't it? And then you're sort of set, really. You just got to analyse it against certain frameworks. Okay. So the thing is, if you've got an organisation that's just prescriptive in terms of where they're going, they're just not going to make them. They're not going to see what's going on. So actually, they're going to miss quite a lot. So it's never going to. They're not going to really see what emergent technology there is. It's not going to be an innovative organisation, and it would just be doing more of the same, basically. So, given that we know that our leaders are going to have to be really responsive to what's going on, they're going to have to follow a sort of an emergent strategy for the organisations they work for. What does this tell us about the sort of people that are going to be good leaders? What qualities do they need to have? What skills will they need to have?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
So we've talked about prescriptive being this idea of sort of almost like full steam ahead. We know what we're doing, we're going to do it at any cost. Then we've got emergent, which is listening to what's going on and sort of seeing what's going on, shaped by external forces. Given that the ideal strategy is going to be one that really has some response, so is emergent, what does that tell us about what our leaders are going to have to be like to be able to sort of almost make the most of these opportunities?
I think they need to be adaptable, but also I think they need to be need to have some sort of entrepreneurship or innovation, so that they can take, what they can take from a bad situation and make it better. Like the first thing that probably would have started happening when COVID-19 started would have been how do we keep things going within the airline industry? What extras have they got that that can help, I suppose, and how are they gonna start re-advertising, I suppose?
Absolutely. Oh,
they were allowed to.
There are some travel industry websites as well that might be worth looking at, and I'll have a look. Sure, I'll do some social media for some companies, so I'll have a look at what links are used for that, because that could be interesting to give you some sort of background. Yeah, absolutely. Our emergent leaders are not going to just be those that following directions. They're going to be the ones that are willing to take risks, in some ways, are not just entrepreneurial but intrapreneurial within the business to make the most of the opportunities that are going on. So we're going to need both. We're going to need this idea of some prescriptive, so we follow the plan, we know where we're going, but some emergent in terms of listening and experimenting as well. So the chances, but that does take someone with quite an unusual skill set really to have that combination of both, because they've got to have the discipline and the belief in the long-term vision, but also the sort of I don't know, that they're willing to take these risks, but they're supported in taking them as well, and that their team are willing to go with them in terms of making it happen. And you can see in the sort of organisations that we'd class as really innovative, like the sort of Google type organisations, that would work culturally. But I don't know in other organisations whether that would be seen as too risky to have that sort of taking a risk. What do you see in your workplace? Do you see both in your workplaces, the prescriptive and emergent?
Yeah, there's definitely a resistance to change within JLR. The organisation as a whole likes to operate a certain way, and it does take a big movement, if you like, to actually get real change and get everyone on board with it as well.
Yeah. And the people who do get them on board, what do they do? You know, what's happened? What does work?
You've just got to sell it, haven't you? You've got to and be able to demonstrate that it works. There's been lots of changes within the org, as in like structural changes and stuff like that. People might think, well, we've done this for the last 10 years and it's worked, but you know, they've got to be open to doing it a different way, because you know, and then whoever's the leader, or you know, who's coming up with that idea or wants to actually make that change, should be able to demonstrate with some data, hopefully, that it's actually going to work.
And then if it is, are people bought into it then if they get it? Or do they still not want to do it?
Well, yeah, you haven't really got a choice, have you? So in some cases, you just got to do it. I think you've got to buy into it sometimes. You've got to just... It depends what role you're in, doesn't it, I suppose? If you're in a leadership role, you've got to believe in it, and you've got to, because you've then got to try and pass that down, yeah.
I know within independent veterinary practice, you can be part of a organisation called the Excel Vets. So they're an independent group that support independent practices. So you become a member, but they buy as a group. So it tries to keep competitive advantage with the companies that can buy like mass drugs and get a really cheap price. So they work with companies and drug companies and things like that to get sort of a cheaper all-round price for the individual, but they're sort of part of a group. So I suppose they've seen the market to try and join everyone together that's an independent practice, but actually strategically it helps an independent practice to be part of them, because they do get a lot of benefits and sort of their own. It makes you feel part of, I suppose, of a community, so that you're not alone against sort of these big corporate companies.
Well, that lends itself to what I was talking about, sort of the cooperations, doesn't it? Building alliances to be able to have some competitive advantage, but they still retain their autonomy. So it's sort of the best of both worlds, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. I mentioned before about this idea of a green strategy as well, and this comes from sustainability. So it would be things like the sort of eco drive that we've got, and we are seeing this shaping organisational strategies. So this could be one of the angles that you go for if you can find an airline over the past 3 years that has done more to sort of align with this. The government is a key driver on this in terms of how they're taxing, but also what is what's legislated for as well. Actually, there are seen to be quite key business opportunities as well, which can involve cost reduction by going that route, but also they see in terms of perception that it adds real value. So out of the three things, we've got the customer legislation, we've got the business opportunities it provides, and then we've got the sort of customer side of it. Which do you think is the key driver for the sort of evolution towards a green strategy in terms of business practices?
I think it's a mix of the first one and the last one. A lot of people are now more keen to go with companies that are with more corporate like responsibility, like CSR. But then obviously you have to abide by government legislation. It's a little bit like, I know this is not a green issue, but like GDPR, you can't say I'm doing it or I'm not doing it. You've got to do it. There's certain health and safety things you have to follow. There's like CO2 emissions. You know, there's going to be penalties, isn't there, if you're not meeting those at some point, you know, so I suppose they need to get it ahead of it. But also on a customer point of view, I think people like to see that you're doing your bit to keep the environment. Yeah,
it has got a PR benefit. Why do you think for the SVO people, which driver is it more government led, do you think?
Yeah, in a way, yeah. Well, one of the missions of JLR at the moment as a whole is this Destination Zero, which is like zero harm and zero emissions as well is one of those things. So like for them to get to zero emissions, obviously for an automotive industry who've got a huge logistics network and all that's going to be a really big challenge. But like one of the things COVID's done is shown us that we can work from home a lot more. So I think just as there's one of the changes strategy wise is to get as many people as possible working from home, I think, as well. So that'll help towards their environmental sort of objectives as well.
I think also you need to look at the product though as well, Dave, on that. You know, nothing leaves our factory without a 5-litre V8 inside of it.
Yeah.
And
well, even an electric car isn't exactly CO2 friendly, really, when you think about the manufacture of it, and you're still taking power off the grid.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, depending on the industry, I guess it's really difficult to meet that totally CO2 neutral.
So I suppose it would be looking at the bigger picture of how they can, if they want to, how they offset the sort of electricity they use within their factories, how they can do something to give back to the grid. I suppose it's not just about the final product, is it? It's about how they run everything. Like there are some companies that give back more to the grid than they actually use by implementing other things.
It's I definitely think this could be something that you consider in terms of the airline industry as well, because it's just such a huge consumer, isn't it, of for the fuel, for the there's so many implications as well in the transport industry. So this could be something that you explore anyway, and it could be one of the changes that you explore. But if it's not, please feel free just to not focus on it. Just use bits that you think really resonate with what you're looking at. We want to look at the market as well. So this is where actually something like the Passport Euro Monitor might work really well when we're looking at the size of the market as well and where you fit into that. So in terms of the airline that you're going for, is it a premium one? Is there a big market for that? Is there an expanding market for it? How fast are things changing in it? And just sort of, I think you mentioned as well that Anna, that we've got in Euromonitor, one of the sites you mentioned, you've actually got market share in there as well, so you can see.
Yes, that's on Craft, I think.
Yeah, that could be quite interesting.
I've just put the link on the messaging for Alfred's video. It's on YouTube, so if you log into YouTube, just copy and paste.
Yep, that's fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, because that'll show you how to use those resources, because there are quite a few databases that could be helpful. And then another thing we need to consider in the environment is just how much it changes in terms of like how turbulent the industry is. I don't know if the airline industry, well, it wasn't it? Because even before COVID, if we think about, there were a number of holiday companies going under, weren't there? Can you remember what was the reason why in the last couple of years? Why did because
I think some of it was to do with people booking their own sort of holidays rather than package holidays. So you kind of cutting out the middleman. So a lot of the holidays I book, I will book the hotel separately to the flight if it's cheaper, so that you've got more option online to go and look at booking everything yourself individually, booking your own transfers. Whereas I think years ago, if you wanted to go on holiday, you went to the high street, you went into a Thomas Cook or whatever you wanted to go in, and you'd sit down and you say, I want to go here, there's 4 of us, and they'd tell you how much it was, and you'd be going, and you would be from your door, like from the airport to the hotel door, without having to think about anything. I think people are more like savvy now with the internet, so I think they can do more for themselves.
Is there, yeah, so we've got this sort of empowered and the joining up of like various things and all the options that we've got, and also we don't have to go to hotels, we can go to Airbnb. We've got a whole series of disruptors, and haven't we, in the market that have changed.
Yeah, isn't it advance on technology? Like with the smartphones as well, you can do anything on a smartphone now. You can arrange your own trip via the maps. No, that doesn't take very long, does it?
No, so
historically you'd have to actually get like a proper map out and get like of Italy and plan everything out, you know.
And that's all. You're really, so this has changed the way we interact with things, doesn't it? It's changed the demand, I suppose, in terms so that's kind of disrupted the market. Do you think, though, for airlines, do you think that has much of a difference, or would have had much of an impact on, for the package providers? I can see, but I suppose it depends if the airlines are part of that package, doesn't it?
So like for Flybe, they blame COVID-19 for going bust, but they had a lot of issues before, and the Independent have got an article where it says that they'd got smaller aircraft, thinner routes. There was quite a good, decent rail alternative than having to fly where they went to, and that customers are quite fickle these days, and they don't stick to a particular company, they move around.
Because that's really true, isn't it? Because there was a sort of a loyalty that doesn't necessarily behave. People don't behave in the same way, do they? So all I was trying to do here was get like a feel for actually how turbulent the airline industry is and how much change there is within it, and that will partly depend on which type of carrier that you use, and if you're going higher end or if you're going more mass market or if you're going budget. So we mentioned earlier on that you could use a pestle as a way of analysing the environment and getting some ways, just collating a series of information as to what the changes are and then why they might go a certain route because of these changes. If you're going to use a pestle, please use it as an opportunity to get some absolutely fantastic references in. Don't just do your opinion, and don't just use one source, even if on one of the databases they have got pestles in there. Please use a variety of sources, because it is brilliant for giving you some really up-to-date and current referencing that you can use. But also, what's the limitations of a pestle? Anyone?
Does it not include internal factors like within, like say the employees and how they are working? I don't know.
No,
yeah, it does.
Well,
go on. Does it?
It does.
Go on. Where do they fit in then?
I would say it does. Because some of the social things is that some of the advantages of that company is that they would use, they'd offer a good pension scheme, or they'd offer childcare vouchers, or there's like certain schemes for, I know in the Indian one that I did, there was schemes to get women back to work.
So I think a pestle in its purest form, it feeds into a SWOT, which actually does look at the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats, which are part of the pestle, the opportunities and threats. I think Dave's got the point there about actually misses it gives a wider context, but actually it it doesn't look at the resource, it purely looks at the environment. And when I've said before, we're looking at a strategy based on what resources we've got and what's in the environment. So I think this feeds the environment really well and gives a structure. But again, it's only limited on what information you put in there. So actually, you could choose to have a very, very biased picture on this and miss a lot of the information out in terms of what's going in. So it's, I suppose the main limitations is it's just what you put in, but it doesn't necessarily, it's not focused on the internal, it's focused more on the external. But you know, it can then allude to some of the things going on internally as well. So it could be helpful, but it only looks at the environment. Something else that could be helpful as well for you is looking at the life cycle of where the airline industry is at, but also where your airline is within that as well. So in this, we're looking at, like, this is like an innovation curve. So it's looking at sort of where there's much scope for growth in an industry, where it's hit maturity, where people are going to be using something less. In terms of the airline industry, where would we even put that? Do you think the number of flights are still growing?
It'll be in decline, won't it? At the minute, surely.
Well, most places the staff numbers actually decrease, so a lot of it will kind of decline in that aspect. But I think some airlines may still be kind of like getting some kind of growth, whether it's in, I don't know, in comparison to other airlines. I think generally, like Freddie says, that most of them have been a bit of a decline.
I think
Then
you,
it could, yeah,
I think you could look at sort of automation and things with it, and it's more about analysing and changing and adapting to make you growing. And when I suppose you kind of reaching your maturity of your business.
Well, I suppose this comes on to a point is actually, how do we measure this? Because if it's number of sales, is that going to be number of flights? So as long as the number of flights are still increasing, then we've got a growing market, haven't we? But at the moment, to say, if they're declining because of the current situation, wasn't there a big pressure before COVID about people flying too much? And there was this sort of suggestion about how many flights we should take a year, or do you remember any of this? It was sort of seen as, I think it was all part of this like the Extinction Rebellion, wasn't it? Do you remember there was massive publicity about it, about how many?
Yeah, there was an actress who was pro it.
Yeah, this was
took a private jet to get to the
protest,
that's what I was thinking. Wasn't it?
Yeah. So yeah, it was all these celebrities, who were protesting about it all, and traveling very many miles to get to the protest. But I think if you want to use this, the thing to look at is just flights in general, and maybe don't just take the COVID period, but maybe look over the sort of 12 months before COVID. Actually, are we in a position where we're competing rather for more flights? Are there more flights of a particular length? Are there, it's just about understanding, because we don't want to invest a lot of energy in or time and resource in buying a new series of aeroplanes if there's no, if we're in a dying industry. So this is quite a useful thing just to get a feel for actually where we're at in terms of the market growth and where you can plot it. Go on.
Could you like use it in a way to look at how the number of employees in each company has rapidly declined? So obviously they're probably not getting the same amount of flights as they usually would, but they're also cutting back on so many other things where they're trying to pull money back in that way, like with the thing with the BA.
So that could be a measure, you're right, rather than sales. You're measuring the resource to deliver, and actually if your capacity is delivering, then if your capacity is reducing, unless you're innovating, in which case you could be there still could be growth in the market, but you're serving it differently.
Yeah.
So it's it's quite an interesting one to explore anyway, but it's another angle that you could look at.
What's the magic KPI that determines whether an airline is successful or not? That's the thing that you need to think about, because again, you could be declining number of flights, but your profit per flight is going up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So there still could be some kind of like, growth in the company, even though there might not be as many flights. Because you're cutting back on people's salaries, the amount of staff's declined.
Yeah,
other resources are kind of changing.
Which is why if you choose an airline that's got some annual reports, they will have some key metrics that we've just discussed. And actually there might be, because there tend to be associations for various industries, and they will probably have the way that they measure these things, and that could be well be worth looking at as well.
Cheers.
Yeah, so I've got some really good things, and thank you, David. That was really good idea. I know degree people, you've done Porter's 5 Forces, haven't you? I'm not yeah, have you done it to death?
I think it's come up in a couple of modules.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one, so that's why. Did we do it on CMI? I don't think we necessarily did.
I don't think so.
No, let me talk through it. So the idea is we can, so back to, I mentioned power earlier, and about our power position. The idea is if all these things line up, we can make as much profit as possible because we've got more strength to create, basically to grow the business. And it's pretty easy if I show the next slide in terms of how this is done. So there are 5 different areas or 5 different, almost like stakeholders, if you like, that impact the level of power that we've got. Right in the middle there, we've got our competition. So some of that can be direct, some of it could be indirect, but depending on the marketplace that we're operating in, the position, that will give us an indication as to, so if we're Ryanair, if we're competing against EasyJet, they put their price up. When we put our price up, they put our price, so they're all very similar. There's not much we can do in terms of the competitors. We're a little bit stuck. We're a bit sort of have to respond. That's the game theory that I mentioned. Another aspect of it, so if I go top left, is the number of new entrants in the industry. Now, one thing that's really good about airlines is the cost of setting up an airline. It's not something you can do overnight. It's a really, really expensive business to get into. The cost, the relationships that you've got to have with the airports, all the infrastructure that you need to have in place, it means that you've got, it's probably one of the hardest industries to get into. So because of that, that protects us somewhat. Our suppliers, so this might be companies like GE Aviation that supply certain parts of the plane or the whole plane or Boeing or whatever it is. It depends on if we are Ryanair, we're buying a lot of second refurbished planes from a particular supplier. We probably have more power over them because they want to have that business with us. If we're a new airline and we're just buying 1 or 2 and we're buying them from Airbus, we're probably going to have quite a low level of power in that relationship. The supplier will have more power because they've got the know-how. We're depending on them to give us sort of ideas on how we can do things. So that dynamic is also crucial. Customers, so if we move top right, it depends on what other options they've got quite often, and it depends on if we've got big corporate customers, then, or if we're sort of a we could I mean, one of the industries in terms of airline is the sort of private chartered airlines, and there was some that almost like an Uber type model, so you could actually share a private jet with people, and there's small niche businesses that do things like that. It's the customer power. If we're talking about something like Ryanair, they've got very little really, unless there is a big rebellion against things that we're doing, and then we respond to it. But actually, they just either accept our prices or go somewhere else. But if we've got something where, I don't know, we've got large corporate clients, or if we are as I say, like a private chartered jet, where we've only got a couple of clients, they will have more power over us than the other way around. And then the substitutes, I think we've mentioned before, like with some of the airlines, that it was easy to have a rail alternatives, or especially if you've potentially got you just got more of a domestic flight service, you might find that your substitutes are higher. So again, you're not in a strong position there because people have got different alternatives. So just with those brief sort of overview that I've given you, what's the point? Why bother looking at the 5 forces? What does that tell us?
It tells you all the things you've got to consider when.
Yeah, and it gives us an idea on our flexibility, doesn't it? How much can we put prices up? Gone at, like, you know, what options have we really got? Because if we're in a position where we've got very, very high competitors, we've not got a lot of options, really, have we? It could also give us an idea of, actually, if we don't want to have high substitutes, then maybe we need to get out of the domestic market. You know, maybe we need to shift more into the transatlantic market, at which point, you know, what else can you do apart from fly or go on a boat for a long period of time? So, yeah, is there anything else that you can think that it would inform you strategically? I think its main use is, are you vulnerable? And if you're vulnerable, which area are you vulnerable with and what are you going to do about it? So I think it can be really, really helpful, just in the sense of, like, we've got to do something about this. We're not differentiated enough. We're not. So I think it is. It also, maybe you consider having different alliances. It just shows your weak points as much as anything, and it's worth reviewing quite regularly as well, because markets really, really change and they're disrupted quite a lot. So I do think it's quite a useful tool to just see if you're in the right position, and if you're doing something where people actually, you've also got to consider, do people want it? Because it's one thing having something where you've got a great say over, you're doing something really different, but actually if it's not demanded by the public, there's no so that's the one challenge with this. It doesn't look at what the market wants, it just looks at where you sit within the market, if that makes sense. So you're not looking at customer demand. And then this one, it does look at demand, and that's why this is looking at our strategy from a different perspective. So this is where we do a customer-led strategy, and we're looking at how our customers are changing, what their profile's like. Have we got, as we've just spoken before, about people building their own travel itineraries? They're using their phones to create things. They're using, they're building the jigsaw together. So if they're doing that, maybe the segment we go for are sort of independent travellers who want quick turnarounds in terms of sort of going away for adventures, and they want something that's cheap and accessible. So we define our position based on who our market are going to be, and then we present them with something where we have this value added offering that we're creating. So I think for this one, so our Porters one looked at what's going on in the market. This one looks at, it's a customer led approach. So we're not looking at the competition, we're looking instead at the people who make the decisions and actually what do they want, and then from that we can create something that's really meaningful. And that sort of almost will be the starting point when you do the marketing module. It's all about being customer focused and what does the market want and pulling towards there. So from all this, I've given you different theories, different models, different ideas. You need to pick just a couple, okay, because otherwise it's too much. For the first assignment, you definitely, you don't need many of these, but just pick the ones that are most relevant. I would love it if before our session next week, you can contact me and let me know what company you're going for and what's the change. And just feel like you've actually found some information on them and you feel quite confident going forward. Because I think then whenever I do these sessions, you'll be able to relate it directly to your assignment and make notes on it. This is like all the contents I wanted to show you for the first session. It was just, as I say, like a real introduction to different concepts, and then you pick the ones you want. Is there anything else? So you've got some reading there. As I mentioned, you've got Bennis and Narnus, who I mentioned a few times. Lynch is the main one. Further on the slides, I gave you a more recent edition of Lynch that you could refer to. for next week, hopefully the beginning of the middle of the week, I'll get Aula set up and I'll contact to make sure that you've got access to it. I'm going to try and get ahead as much as I can this week with the remaining slides. I'll definitely have the next 2 weeks done, so everything you need for the first assignments, but I might not manage the whole course this week. As I mentioned, I had asked Daniel Quinn to come in, but do you want him to, or would you prefer us just to go through the material? Is there anything that would add value on the assignment side of it that he could help you with? Or, I don't want him to come for no reason, so tell me if there's anything that you think would be helpful.
I think I'm okay.
Yeah, I got the impression you were. Anything from anyone?
No, I think I'm all right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm all right.
I think if we're struggling, then we'll. It might be best if he comes, but maybe have a go first, and then maybe on a later date he comes rather than sort of straight away.
So shall I ask him not to do next week, maybe to pencil it in the week after, which is the week before your assignment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because maybe if there's any referencing sort of queries or anything like that, then, or questions of how we want to set things out, if we don't feel we're setting it out properly, we could then ask.
Yeah, okay, I'll do it. So I'll ask him to, I think that's on the 3rd of October. And then I'll check with you at the end of next week, the session next week. And if there's nothing there, then I'll just cancel. Because it's really nice.
The model.
What was that?
The model, are they all on the slide now? Can we access them on the slide?
What the?
Today's
yeah,
slide.
everything I've shown you is the slides I've sent over. I haven't put anything more in, so it's all there. And it won't be on Moodle. It will be on Aula when you can access it.
Oh.
Okay, but it's not. I haven't put it on yet. I'm going to do it this week. Okay.
And Hannah, you're still going to give us a copy of this recorded session, yeah?
Yep. So I'm going to stop recording it shortly, and I'm going to upload it on YouTube, which will take a little while because it's like 6 hours.
Okay.
I'll be interested if anyone ever watches it.
And also, do you know if the library's open at CUC?
I think you have to pre-book a space if you want to book an area to work.
Okay, all right.
I
just want to go in there and get some books if possible, because I'm old school. I like books.
You like flicking through them, do you?
Yeah, I hate books online.
You can email library.
Do they post them to you?
Sorry?
Do they post them to you? Because some libraries, especially if you like a distance learning, they actually post them to you.
Well, I've still got some books that I had pre-lockdown that I've got to have back before the 23rd of September. So at some point, I suppose I've got to make an appointment to give those back. One's from CUC Library and the other one's from Lancaster.
Okay. I think they are open because students are on site as of Monday.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
It looked like it was open the other day when I went in.
So when you went in, what was it like? Was it like, did you face mask up and 2 meters away?
Yeah, you
have
to wear face masks, but it was.
And could you actually hear what this person was saying?
Yeah.
I struggle with that.
Yeah. Everyone wears face masks when they're indoors, but it looked like it was like a normal day, really.
Okay. So, Freddie, did you have to make an appointment to go in the library, or could you just walk in?
No, I didn't go in the library. I went in to see one of the people on reception to try and sort out my enrolment. But yeah, people walking in and out towards the library and things like that. So it looked like it was open.
Okay, thanks. Because I'm still working from home. You see, I've not been on campus since March.
I just want to ask you something, Hannah. The strategic change that you choose in assignment 1, did you say that it needs to be a change that is from 2017, quite recent?
It's got to be within the past 3 years. So it could be this year, it could be last year, but it can't be anymore. So it can't be when we're talking about 2011. It can't be that. It has to be the last couple of years.
It can be like people based as well, can't it? It's a lot. Yeah. That's what I'm going to do with British Airways about the cutting of staff and things. So yeah, that's fine.
Okay. I'll contact the library as well and just see if they're open, and I'll send you all an email about that. Okay.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. So that was today's. So our sessions will normally be about this sort of period of time. Thanks ever so much. Thank you as well for talking to me while I'm presenting, because it is a little bit of a sort of, it's not ideal. Really nice to meet you all, and I look forward. So we'll do the same next week. So it'll be 9:30 next week, but I will be in touch with you. I've got various things to follow up on, and I'll make them all happen. If you get a chance, you drop me a line with your ideas, and if you've got anything else you want to run past me before then, or if you even want to talk through any of the contents if you didn't quite get it, please let me know and we'll sort that out. Okay, have a really nice weekend. Yep.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Hannah. Cheers.
Thanks, Hannah. Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Okay,
everyone.
bye-bye.
So we'll see you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Anna. Enjoy the rest of your day.